When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Ali Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits. Welcome, everybody, to Season 6 of Insatiable. This season, our theme is radical healing and what's possible when we get to the root cause of what ails us. And we are using activist Angela Davis's definition of radical, which is to pull things out at the root. We heal when we're in choice, not when everything goes our way. So we're going to explore how to get to the root of our stories and what radical healing changes in our lives. Before we get to today's really fun out-of-the-box episode, I want to invite you to join me in Truce with Food this coming January. It's a personalized online coaching experience to create lasting food and life freedom. Registration opens January 2019. This program is only open once a year, so don't miss out. You can join the waitlist where you'll also get some goodies at alishapiro.com/trucewithfood2019. And we always have such a great community coming from Insatiable. So if you love the kind of conversation we're going to have today and that we have on the podcast, you will love Truce with Food. Okay, so now on to today's episode. This episode is all about our health goals as we head into 2019. And weight loss is ranked number 1 in goals, yet is it the right goal for us? So this episode is not going to tell you that wanting to lose weight is good or bad. Rather, I want us to question if weight loss is really the true goal. Or is it a simulacrum attempt at making your mark on the world? And a simulacrum is a fake version of something real. So think of the wax museums, right? You have a fake version of a real person. Think of Vegas. It's trying to recreate all these parts of the country, but it's manufactured, not organic. So now that we understand that definition, I want you to kind of have a little bit of background of how I came to this podcast episode observations. For the past 12 years, when I explore with clients what they think will happen after they lose weight, it really boils down to one core thing, that being the real them is going to be easier. And with this increased ease, they'll be able to take the risks they want to take to live life on their terms. So some examples of this is, well, dating will just be easier and they'll feel like they can go for the people they really want to date. Pursuing our work ideas will feel more natural and less risky. As one client said to me in a session once, I feel more bulletproof when I'm thin. But this bulletproof vest my client described isn't thinness. It's resilience and courage, which alchemize into the freedom to create and express our truth in whatever form that takes. So weight loss is a simulacrum or fake version of safe self-expression. Because what I know for sure is that wildly creative entrepreneurs, leaders, and thinkers burn their creative energy on battling food and make their body their project if they aren't creatively challenged. And we need resilience and courage to stretch ourselves to make our mark. And I want to emphasize that creativity is about how we think too. I used to think I wasn't a creative person because I didn't write or draw or paint, but creative is also how we think about things. It's problem solving. It's how we lead teams. And entrepreneurship, they are creative outlets as much as writing and designing. In today's episode, I'm talking with 2 of my Truce with Food alumni clients, Linda Kirkley-Gilbert and Brianne Ward, both previous guests on Insatiable, to talk about what happens when you don't wait on the weight and redirect your creative energy away from battling your body and towards your body truth, which is discoverable, unique, profound, and liberating. And it's also where your rebel soul lives. Given they're a couple years out of the program and further outside the food and body battle, I wanted to have them on to, one, report back, because we don't have many people who have actually ceased battling food and their body and had a truce with food to report back from this brave new world. And second, I want them to share what they've had to pull out at the root and replant so they can have sustainable resilience and courage that is independent of what we weigh. And one thing I want to be clear is that ceasing the battle with food or your body doesn't mean you eat perfectly or you're always thrilled with your body. Rather, it's that you trust when you aren't eating or exercise as well as you like, you will eventually return to better habits once the risks you're taking aren't at their peak. So that's the key there, is that we have the self-trust not to freak out and go back into diet mode. So that was a big intro. Welcome, Leanne and Linda.
You combined our names.
You guys are a famous couple now, right?
Yeah.
So happy to be here as half of Leanne.
I'm trying to think of the famous couples that they do. I can't even think of it now.
Well, couples do that now in marriages. Like, instead of the woman taking the man's last name, sometimes they'll combine the last name.
Oh.
Yeah. So don't know first names, but last names. It's a thing.
Now you guys have to go on podcast episodes as Leanne.
My official partner now.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for coming back. You've both been for previous episodes. To get their full stories, you guys can listen to those, although we'll be talking a little bit about them as well today. As we get started, I would just love your reactions to that opening of how we tend to redirect this energy, this qi, as they would call it in Chinese medicine, that wants to have a flow, right? We talk a lot about inflammation in Western medicine, and we don't want to be inflamed. However, in Chinese medicine, when things are stagnant and puddle and think of constipation, think of, dryness, that sets up for disease as well. And I found that often our creative energy is stagnant and keeps getting redirected and overheated when we're trying to battle our body. So I would just love your own observations based on the journey you've taken. And Brianne, you can go first since you're on my screen.
Yeah, that sounds great. First of all, it made me feel really emotional just hearing you talk about like pulling things out at the root and that we heal when we're in choice. And I think something that I talked to you about is feeling like a lot of my healing was done through yoga, and we talked about patterns and stories, but I didn't have a framework to help me be able to see my story more clearly and get out of it and change it. So this work gave me a framework. And again, I feel like through yoga and different healing practices in my life, I was beginning to understand that I did have this creativity, because I always told myself, I wasn't a creative person. It was just something that I didn't have. And I could see that I wanted to be more intentional with the direction of my life. But again, I feel like I was just like trying to hold everything together and doggy paddling to keep up with the pace instead of being really intentional about what I was for and the ways that I wanted to spend my time. And we may talk about this more. I just left a job, but what I loved about the job going into it was that it was part of a model. So I felt like there was an answer, like someone had figured out the work for me. I wasn't going to have to figure it out on my own. And it was so exciting because as I was leaving almost 7 years later, I realized that's part of the reason that I wanted to leave, is because now I want to find my own way. So
I just got chills.
Me too.
Yeah, it feels really, really powerful to think like, wow, I want something so different than what I wanted coming in here. I don't want someone else to define the role for me anymore.
Oh my God, we're totally going to have to talk about that. Over to you, Linda.
I realize that I have Leanie as my kind of code name, which could also be like Leanne. Maybe that's why it sounds that way. But yeah, it's funny when you originally, reached out to Brianne and I about being on the episode, kind of like, where are they now? It's been a while. It was interesting because I had this like kind of double thing happening in my mind. One was I have come so far, and all of it's due to the work that we did. But I'm like, on the other hand, like I'm not, where, and I don't even want to say where I want to be weight wise, but like weight and how I look physically is not even like on my radar. And originally, I wanted to say, well, I don't know if I'm like the poster child for the program. And then I realized I'm like, this is what the program's about, is that I'm not battling food at all. But I think it was so funny because the fact that my mind went to that other place shows that like those kind of thoughts and stuff are still out there. But in reality, like I don't think that way anymore. So when it felt really unnatural to even be, feeling like, I don't know how to say where I'm at. But then, as we spoke more and thinking about, this creativity and things that come into play when you're not battling food anymore, I'm clearly living that life. And it's so funny because I'm a finance person and I always think of myself as creative because the kind of finance work is like budget and planning. So it's kind of like future thinking. But I would say since you and I did our work together, I think I've done some of the best work I've done in my career. And I've, we'll talk later, but I've, continued to evolve and recognize what my needs are and, seek out, pathways to see my dreams become a reality.
Yeah. Well, and let's be clear, it wasn't super creative accounting, the bad kind, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You had a lot of bad.
None of that.
Rebelling in a healthy, integrated way.
Exactly.
Linda is not on a help wanted poster. Yeah, I love hearing you guys say that because, one of the things I really want to flush out for people is that there's a brand promise to weight loss, right? If we think of a brand, like we think of Apple, we think like their brand promise is that we're different, right? Think differently. Starbucks has a different brand promise than Dunkin' Donuts, right? We think differently about ourselves, and those are all based on values. And what the success failure binary that weight loss has set up, it's not about a small body. But I think thinness is sold as this quick fix to safe self-expression. In other words, weight loss will make it easier to take up space being the real us. In other words, I trust myself to take more risks and it won't hurt as much when I get knocked around. And that is what I think we ultimately really want from life, is to be self-expressed with our ideas, with our way of being. And we're taught that, hey, if you lose weight, it's going to be easier to do that. But actually, nothing really changes in that process. If anything, you become more dependent on someone else's plan and structure. And so you don't even find your voice, let alone it keeps you in that black and white binary thinking that you're not just thinking about that with diets, you're also thinking about that in the areas of your life where you feel more vulnerable, which does not set us up for creativity at all. So I just want to let people know that weight loss is selling a brand promise. It is a product. It is not a place. So when we were exchanging emails about doing, Brianne, you said, this is like Truce with Food is kind of like Truce with Lifing. And I was curious for both of you, what did you find was really required to increase first your self-trust, resilience, and courage? Because you need that for then the safe self-expression, or in other words of saying that is life on your own terms. So I want to first say, what do we need to get that? And what you discovered was really required for that before we get to, the payoff.
Do you want to start, Linda, or do you want me to?
Go, you start, Brianne.
Take it away. So yeah, it sounds so simple, but where I needed to start was getting clear on what I needed. Like physically, what foods I needed, and that's something that we worked on together. I had been not a vegetarian. I ate fish here and there, but I didn't eat meat for 6 years. And through our work, I decided to try, eating meat again, and realized like that had a huge impact on how I felt through the day, on my afternoon crashes. So physically, what did I need? And then even emotionally, I have done really emotionally draining work as a public health nurse, managing a team. And I wasn't respecting my introversion, wasn't respecting like, hey, I need to go home at the end of the day and like be quiet before I engage with anyone or try to go back out. I need so much more downtime than I was allowing myself. So reconnecting with my love of reading and just like sitting quietly with a cup of tea at night. Just these really, really simple things that I realize are so important to me before I could get clear on what I wanted. I had to get clear on what I needed.
And I remember too in Truce with Food about how you really had a different way you wanted to lead your team and what you wanted to measure. And because I think people think all of a sudden you have all these ideas and you know yourself and it's like, oh, overnight, right? That's what weight loss promises. Oh, once I get there, I'll have it all figured out. And how did understanding your emotional needs start to give you the courage to lead in the way that you wanted to lead that team?
Yeah, so I've always valued deep, vulnerable connection, but it's a scary, scary place to be. So instead of trying to being so like measured with my risks, our work really helped me to lead more from my heart and to show up as myself. What I wanted from my staff was to like let go of the perfectionism. We're a team. We're not going to learn from each other if we're all trying to show up like we have it figured out. And I realized that's not what I wanted. I didn't want to come to work anymore and feel like because I was the leader, I had to have all the answers. So I started leaning on my peers, other supervisors a lot more heavily going into their offices and being like, I think I fucked up, or I don't know what to do, and then seeing what that created on the team for nurses out there. We did an audit of each other's charts. And I felt like when I was in their position, that for me was like awful, like knowing that one of my peers was going to see my charts. But it got to the point with them when I asked for feedback, they'd be like, yeah, it's great getting to see other people's documentation and how they organize things. So just seeing how the team then showed up in this vulnerable way. And as I was leaving, that was something during our last team meeting that one of the nurses said to me. She's like, the vulnerability you lead with is something that I'm going to be like marinating on and is going to be with me for a long time. And that is the best compliment I could have gotten,
I just got chills because I'm thinking as you say that, growth mindset gets tossed around a lot right now, right? It's really great research and everything. Yet a lot of clients and I have talked about how when you're in a workplace, it sounds all good in theory to do growth mindset and say you're going to learn and mess up but it's so much harder to actually execute and do. And you took the risk to say, you embodied growth mindset in an area where you didn't know if it was safe. And so you learned to do it in a gradual way, not the all or nothing way.
Yeah. And I feel like what was so great from that and something I learned, through our experimenting was testing these different ways of being. I got to see like, oh my gosh, everybody's just like walking around feeling afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or they're not enough. What if we all just talked about it instead of like continuing to wear these masks and feel like we have to pretend we have it all figured out. So,
well, I love that because it's, I'm big on saying truth with food is option C, where it helps you it's option C between kind of giving up and diet culture. And it's a metaphor for seeing option C in our leadership roles as well, because a lot of times self-help advice will say, well, just don't worry about what other people think. And it's like, well, actually, you're part of a team. You need to have that communication. So it's not like don't care or care too much. It's like, where is that appropriate middle? And I think you probably figure that out. And especially you learned that as you left, that it really touched people.
Totally. And I want to be honest too, it didn't always feel good. There were definitely days where I was sitting there like, I don't want to be in this position or I don't belong in this position but you got to stay with those moments and the ones where you feel validated.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Linda.
I loved hearing that. And I'm glad you went first, Brianne, because you actually touched on a lot of, I'm thinking of it as the question kind of being around the foundation of how I was even able to get started on the path that I'm on. And a lot of it is handling those physical needs. And I think the biggest aha for me in the early years of my Truce with Lifing is that I realized that I think I was beating myself up so much thinking I didn't have any willpower. And I think that was and still today is the biggest realization. I think that was part of where I kind of really had the truce with food, is that I realized at any given time I can be, I always say, I think in my mind, I'm one green smoothie away from, having a great day, and whether it's having a great day, meaning a great food day where I feel like I'm eating, with my values. But the interesting part is, I haven't in years, I haven't had that ramping up, tomorrow it's all going to start. I haven't had that. And that's something that was really taking a lot of energy, like where it'd be like, I'm going to start whatever it is, Whole30, Weight Watchers, like whatever new plan I was going to do. And it was like, I got to go grocery shopping. I got to do all this stuff. I got to, where for me now it's like, all right, like I think the major thing that happens is sometimes I get sick of my eggs and avocado, which I've been having for like years now. So like, people, and all of a sudden I'm like, I haven't had my normal breakfast in a while. So all I do is I get the ingredients for the green smoothie. I usually have some in the freezer, but it's like, that's how I get back on track. And I realized too, like when I'm eating a chocolate in the afternoon, a lot of times, like it's not even, sometimes it's about something going on, but a lot of times it's really just like, well, I was eating kind of crappy all day. So this is kind of what happens. And it's not like I'm a bad person. That's how I get back to it. But the other thing that you touched on, Brienne, was like that emotional side where during Truths with Food, the thing that I don't want to say I'd never done, but I really learned how to do was recognize my emotions and be with them and be comfortable being with them. I just didn't do that. I don't think I was brought up to do that. And I'm realizing that's something I need to work on as a mother, because I'm seeing how I am when my children are in uncomfortable emotions. So that's a whole other episode. But, recognizing that and having tools to even acknowledge what emotion I'm feeling. And the other thing that I did was I stopped drinking, like shortly. I think it was during my second Truce with Food. I was like, I want to try not drinking and see how it feels. And I haven't drank in 2.5 years. Like I haven't touched alcohol in this time. I know. And it's like, I was, I liked drinking, and that was my thing. Like, it was like, I was a very social drinker. I loved happy hours. The hilarious thing is I still go out for happy hours, probably as much as I did before. And like people that knew me as like outrageous when we go out for happy, I'm just as outrageous, and like, but sometimes I think back, like, do I need to be that way? Am I trying to prove that I need to feel this way? And Allie, in the community, when we were talking about the holidays ramping up, something I realized is I was like, I have a little work to do on, the drunk Linda holiday persona. So she's not around anymore. This is just like holiday season without alcohol. But that was something that what I realized was the alcohol made me not deal with my emotions. So, really having to be in them and sit in them. And, this past year I was in a job that I wasn't really happy in. And during that time, there were a couple of times, like, never did I say, oh, I want to have a drink. But I realized, I'm like, I don't think I would have realized why I was upset if I had a drink when I got home from work. I would have thought I was just stressed. I would have thought I couldn't handle the pressure. But being able to, recognize my emotion, like I don't call things stress anymore. I really uncover it. So it's like, there's so many layers to it. So it really is, it's like the physical, the emotional, and then just some of these big, broad changes that I made, that I've continued to do that help me kind of live life. I just feel like I'm living life and feeling life in a completely different way.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the layers too, and what you're describing too about being able to notice these things. Creativity requires context, right? It requires lots of data, lots of experiences, right? Whether you're traveling, whatever, you basically have to pull from all of this stuff. And I think what battling weight loss really puts our life on hold in a way, right? From taking the very risks that we will then learn from, that will make us more creative and understand these different layers. And I think one of the things Brienne and I were talking about in a different email was about how nature's always trying to get to higher levels of complexity, right? So nature's kind of if any framework, not that I'll ever be able to understand all of it, but nature is kind of like my guiding framework. And if nature's always trying to get to higher levels of complexity, as people, we need to understand different layers to ourselves, right? And that gives us, nature's so creative and it's so brilliant. But when we tamp down these things, or I was talking to a client today and she was like, she's just having great results. And she was like, people used to say, feel your feelings. She's like, what the heck does that even mean? And I was like, I know, right? Because I was explaining our feelings. And for people listening, you have your emotions, which are coming from your nervous system. And those are 100% valid. And you need to be able to locate those and identify those. And when we talk about feelings, there's a story about what that emotion means. And it all happens so quickly. So often we're like, well, I just feel like I don't have enough time, or I feel like there's a story within that feeling. And if we don't know how to deconstruct that, we're kind of in this parallel reality that is just, and we need to, I guess my point was, I went off on a tangent trying to teach something about the difference, because people use these terms interchangeably, but they're not. But that we need to be able to learn how to explore our feelings, not just feel them. Because is that one of the things that, I mean, I would love for you guys to share with people how often this protective side of us is telling us one thing when it's not even what's actually happening out there. So
I have an example just from like this was like now almost a year ago, but I was about 6 months into my new job. And at one point, like I was just feeling stressed or whatever, and I'm home and I was crying. Like, I don't remember what even prompted the cry, but what I do remember, and I was talking to my husband, which is funny because he and I used to like not really talk about stuff like that because like, first of all, I didn't talk about my feelings or explore my feelings. And prior to the new job, I like loved my job. I was in it for years. So I didn't really have much to talk about, like just things happened and, whatever. But anyway, so at one point, as I was just like, I was like, I'm going to cry and see where this leads me because I don't know what I'm even crying about at this point. And then all of a sudden I was like, I miss my friends. And I realized that I had this support system in place at my prior institution that I hadn't yet found. And so not only was I in a really uncomfortable position, meaning uncomfortable with, am I qualified, which I look back and I was, but at that time I had those self-doubts. There was a lot of anxiety just permeating the entire institution anyway, for various reasons. And on top of it, I didn't have that daily support system. And some of it was friends to vent to, but also the amount of laughing that we used to do. And it was so, like when I realized, I was like, this is so funny. I'm like crying about missing my friends. But I don't think if I hadn't just let myself kind of go through that tunnel, I don't think I would have realized that. So the next day I like reached out. I was like, we need happy hour. And what they also reminded me of is, are you being the real you? And because these people will find you, like the normal fun people like us that can be that support system will find you. And it's hilarious because I let down my guard and I got some great friends out of it. And I have one of my friends got me actually a mug like a few months before I left the role, knowing I was unhappy. And it said something like, it was one of those quotes like, be yourself, everybody else is taken, like one of those kind of things. Yeah. And it's so funny because I'm like, it's so true. And she realized, like you weren't authentically being yourself. And once you did, things started to get better.
Yeah. One thing as you were saying that, I was thinking about, first of all, then your creativity, and again, creativity is a flow, it's an energy. And one of the things that I get so frustrated with in traditional emotional eating stuff is, and I wrote about this to my list is, people will say, if you're feeling lonely, call a friend, right? Like, so feel what you're feeling and identify it. And they're on the right track, but then it's like, okay, I'm feeling lonely, right? But then they'll say, call a friend. And I'm like, but you're not feeling lonely because you didn't not call your friend. Right. And in an example to the list, it was because this woman happened to be at a parent group because she had going through some challenges with her kid. And she had to speak up there. She had to feel connected in the community there. And that's why she was coming home after those meetings to the fridge. It wasn't because she didn't call her friend. And that's where I think the feel your feelings and try to find a substitute. It's like, no, those feelings are pointing you to a need that needs to be addressed so you can get to the next place or the next fulfillment. Wholeness, whatever you want to call it, the next step. So
plus I'm not a phone person, but
whatever. She was like, why am I not calling my friend? I just want to eat. I'm like, because that's not really, I think deep down we know that's not solving the issue. It's like, this is, no wonder you love chocolate so much if you hate the phone and that's what people are telling you to do. It's like,
you're like, you feel bad. Like, why can't I call my friends? Like, I'm the worst friend ever. Because, that you're like beating yourself up about that. But it's so true.
And I feel like this comes back to the complexity though. Like that's hard to like be with someone while they're trying to figure out what they need and recognize you don't have the answer and just like listen and hold space or just like accept that it's uncertain. So we want to give advice. We want to fix it. We want to tell someone like, oh, call a friend instead of being like, what do you think you need? Or just trusting them to figure it out. So that ability to be with complexity is really challenging. And I think this program definitely helps with practice.
It's funny you should say that, but because I was talking to a couple of different clients and they were talking about how they're navigating their work so much better. And they're like, I can see everything that's happening now, like without being triggered. And I was like, right, it gives you x-ray vision. Like this person's competing, this person's avoiding. And then I would in the past come in and try to, fix it. It's like, no, everyone can have their patterns and I can focus on how I can be the most effective. So I'm glad you brought that up. You do kind of get some x-ray vision when you have a more emotional agility around your own view of things. So do you want to chime in, Brianne?
Oh, I think just what I'm thinking about was when talking about authenticity, and what was coming up for me is just like before I was so busy trying to figure out, like, please and figure out who other people wanted me to be instead of, showing up as who I wanted to be and trusting that I would eventually find the people who want to be with me in that. And I think this is another part of it. It's really hard to hold out for your people. And I think being able to like stay with your emotions and see what they're telling you and kind of navigate your story. Like, okay, does I feel lonely mean like I have no friends or nobody will ever understand me? Or to avoid feelings of discomfort, are we holding on to relationships where we don't feel like we can be our authentic selves, but we don't want to lose that? So I think I'm thinking about right now just like how hard it is to show up as yourself when you're not sure who's going to accept you that way.
Yeah. And I'm glad you say that because, I think the elephant in the room is that thin privilege does exist, right? Like we know from research that people who are overweight are discriminated against. I mean, I've read these stories about doctors, not paying attention to overweight or obese people. And it turned out they were gaining weight from tumors in their stomachs and they die, right? Because they're prejudged for their weight. And we do know that thin people tend to have it easier. And so I want to address that elephant in the room, and that I'm not saying that thin privilege doesn't exist. I'm just saying it's not actually going to give you the resilience and courage that you really want and need to make your mark in the world. And, I was thinking back to some examples in my own life. Like when I was in college, I had studied abroad and I'd gained all this weight because I was binging and then I was like, well, I'm in Europe and once I get back, it'll be easier, and I'd gained all this weight and I started to lose it again. And then like my senior year of college, I felt really safe. My grades were locked in. Like, you feel like I had friends at that point, but I had dropped a ton of weight and I did start dating more easily. Whereas before I always felt like fat, you don't want people to see you naked when you're fat. Like,
Yeah.
But it made me realize that like the reason that I was dating more and having more fun is I was taking more chances, but it was still equally as hard to find someone that I actually wanted to be in a relationship with rather than just going for a drink. And dating was still awkward. Nothing changed except I just took more risks that way, but it wasn't a permanent thing because I was like, what if I lose this? Right. Like, and I did eventually gain weight and I started binging again, so what about you guys? Genuinely, and we can answer this honestly, like, have you noticed at times in your life when you've been thinner, has it really changed a lot on the inside and made certain things like the hard human things of intimacy? And I mean like even personal intimacy, not just sexual intimacy, those kind of things. Has it really made it easier? And you can be honest because maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. So I'm going to go way back here, but I think I mentioned when I was on the podcast before, and this is part of my healing too, that I would even admit to this. Like I was bullied really harshly in grade school and lost weight, started straightening my hair. And in high school, like, felt really accepted and like connected with people. And I would never take that back. But I also confused like regaining some power because of my thin privilege with healing, and was able to see over the years, like, oh my gosh, I still stay or show up for relationships in this way because I'm afraid of being rejected or left. So I think I'm bringing this up to say, like, even if we think things are changing and we're in our power, I think sometimes the thinness is keeping us from looking at what we actually want and what we actually maybe need to heal, instead of like, oh, if I hop on the scale and see a certain number, everything's going to be better.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a powerful point. It can often delay the yeah, it can delay almost what we really need to heal because it feels like it's taken care of, but it's not on that root level.
Absolutely. It took me like another decade and a half to realize it and be like, oh shit, that's still there. The weight, it didn't go away with the weight.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you, Linda? Have you ever had any experiences with that?
Yeah. I mean, so I've been the full gamut of weights. When I got married, I was tiny. I was like a 00 at Banana Republic, like tiny. Like I remember being a size 0 and going in and being like, these clothes are still big on me. I was doing like Weight Watchers. I was eating like lean cuisine for like disgusting. But, and I will say that I have fond memories of that time, but it wasn't from like an intimacy. Like when you said, were things different, but you're like, the important things, and I'm like, yeah, I remember shopping for clothes and loving that, but I don't remember much else except I was like planning my wedding and it was exciting and all that. Right now, I mean, for the past few years, like I'm the biggest I've been in my life. And the interesting part is there's something that I think about it quite a bit actually, is you've talked about like when, like part of the, patriarchy is for, women be thin so you're not noticed and whatever. And I'm realizing I'm like, I kind of just like move through stuff now. Like I'm here, like you can't see. And I've kind of embraced it. It is funny though, because like when I see pictures of myself, I don't picture myself to look like I do. I don't know what I picture myself, but like occasionally, like I'll see a picture and I'm like, my niece got married a few weeks ago. And there's a picture of me dancing with my daughter and it was my back. And I'm like, that's me? Like it totally looked larger than I pictured myself looking, but I'm like, I'm not overly concerned with that. I'd like to lose weight from a feeling good standpoint. So, intimacy, sexuality, I think the most like sensual I felt, or sexually connected to my husband was when I was like actively working out, but like with a better balance. Cause I had a time where I was working out like 7 days a week and then I was sore all the time, not sore.
Not a good sore.
But like sore like my thigh. Yeah, not
I'm like, I hope my mom doesn't listen to this episode. I'm so like puritanical that way.
But like, so like I do know like there's work I can be doing, in those areas. But then, again, like I feel like me and my husband, especially since, it's all around the Truce with Food time, and that's a lot of changes happen that we talked about. But like we're more connected than we ever have been before. I feel like the friendships I have are a lot more solid. Cause like, what else is funny? I think about the kind of conversations I used to have with people. Like they were so dumb. Cause a lot of times they were about like what kind of diet I was on. Like, oh, you look like you've lost, and I loved it. Like if someone noticed that I lost weight, and that would be the conversation. Like I don't have conversations like that with people anymore. Like even like my old boss, like it felt like so 80s. Like it would be like, I'm going to do this cleanse and I have to eat the food a certain amount, like I have to smell the food. It was some crazy thing she was doing. And I'm like, why am I feel dumber. Like, I'm like, why am I having this conversation with you? So, I think things feel different, but I feel like it's strange to me that I'm as comfortable in my skin as I am. Cause if you would have told me like 13, 14 years ago that I would, and I don't even know what I weigh because I don't weigh myself actively, but like I'd be the size that I am and feel the most comfortable I ever felt in my life, I would never have believed you. Like would never have believed that. So yeah, I think, it really is about healing on the inside. The thinness doesn't solve it. And the one thing that I did do recently, like in advance of the new job that I have, I went and like bought some new clothes, like expensive quality clothes. Cause I'm trying to have like a smaller wardrobe, but like more, just like, more neutral, like, I didn't need, like, I just wanted some really nice pieces and I didn't want a bunch of stuff. And I had always held off on buying really nice things because I was like, well, this is temporary. I'm going to lose weight. And then I was like, you know what? Like, fuck this. Like, I'm not waiting anymore. And that was the one last kind of like thing in my head that I was like holding off on. And yeah, and I got some great pieces and I feel really good in them. And I don't have a ton of clothes, but I love the clothes I have. And I'm like, if I lose weight, I'll get them tailored. Like, it's not a big deal, but I'm like at the point where I'm like, I'm not waiting on this thing, this magical unicorn to come for me. But I felt like it was almost like when I bought those clothes, it was like that last kind of remaining thing where I was like, I still do have a little bit of that old mindset dangling around, and like, every once in a while something else will reveal itself. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's that old way of thinking that's still like muscle memory in there.
And though, because you've done so much of the work, you were able to be in choice so much faster, right? Than when you're first digging yourself out, it's like, and you're like, no, this is what I'm going to choose. And I do want to emphasize, like, sexual health and all that stuff is really important. I just meant the stuff that is important is like, I mean, and it is important to feel good in your clothes and all that stuff, but I just meant more, I think weight loss keeps us on a very superficial level and stuff like that, rather than even talking about health and the complexity of what it really takes. No one really knows how people lose weight permanently. Like, that's kind of the big secret, that the industry doesn't want you to know because everyone's so different. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I want to say, kind of bridge one thing that you said that was really interesting, Linda, about people would notice when you would lose weight. And that's often what we talk about in Truths with Food, is that, weight on the surface is about, we feel like a thin body is going to give us the nice medium between, we're not going to be invisible, but we're going to be safely visible, because we don't want to be visible in a bad way. And what's really important, and it's funny how our life paths kind of circle back, but my undergraduate thesis was on this theory called optimal distinctiveness. And it was that as human beings, we all have this desire to be unique, but also part of a group. And that tension is very different based on if you're in a majority identity, say like white people versus Asians versus African Americans versus, racially. I mean, even though, yeah, I was going to say race is made up. It is, but now we have to use it because it's a term that we have to address. But we have or like if you're female versus male in like a tech dominated industry, right? Like all of these things factor into that tension of where you want to be part of the group, but also unique. And I think one of the things that's really important with creativity is we like to be creative because it helps us express only what we can express. And that is what thinness, we are told, is the vehicle to the safe self-expression. And when we feel like we know deep down in our core that when we are self-expressed, we can make the mark on our lives that we're here to do. And so I want to break down what safe self-expression is, and then kind of go into where you guys find yourself, leading on your edge from a creative standpoint. So to make our mark, we need ease, belonging, and to create what's meaningful to us. And again, weight loss is packaged as this is going to be easier and give you kind of the tools to do that. But it's a fake substitute, because I think you guys will agree. It's a lot of work to find your passion and truths, right? That's another thing. Like, oh, it's your passion and whatever. It's like so much more work than anyone really wants to tell you. And creative self-expression, whether it's how you're leading a team, how you're thinking about your work and finance, it's risky and it's edgy, and it's the opposite of easy or safe, right? So what we're really saying when we want ease is we're saying we want flow. We want to break out of that mechanical view of our body and the world and align with our truth. And I think we confuse easy with ease, but I'm defining ease as something different. It's about kind of flow when you're in your truth. And to Brianne's example, when she was, changing up her leadership approach, it's not always comfortable. So that's, ease doesn't mean it's necessarily comfortable, but it feels worthwhile. And that's how we know we're in flow. Belonging is having a community of kindred spirits. To Linda's example, finding your people, right? But first, we have to belong to our own values and define those values on our own terms. This is another thing that gets lost in the value conversation, is that you can take something like, I'm working with a client right now on, she's redefining how she's defining loyalty. Loyalty used to mean accommodate and avoid and just be loyal no matter what. And now she's defining that as she's rewriting her story on her own term. So we need to know that we aren't going to be left and abandoned for our creativity and the way that we think and our unique set of values and how we're defining them. And then lastly, we are hoping for meaning, right? Culture tells us that thinness will give us all the goodies, right? And yet really we get some of the greatest meaning from rewriting our stories, or, in Brianne's terms tonight, healing, right? But we get the most meaning from doing things that are challenging and find out how those challenges can contribute to the greater good. And all of this really requires self-awareness and skills that we can develop. So I'm curious, Brienne and Linda, what brings you ease, meaning, and belonging now versus pre-truce with food? And how has it changed as you've developed more and more self-trust, resilience, and courage?
It makes me laugh because I think back to like reading books on Buddhism and exploring different forms of spirituality, and the idea that you could get so much enjoyment out of just a cup of tea, like just sitting there with your cup of tea. And I remember being like, oh, what are they talking about? You know? And now I sit here and laugh. I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm like so happy sitting on my couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. But yeah, I gained so much meaning from just like simple things. Like I love being with people in like deep and rich and challenging conversation. And I think before I crave those conversations, but I wouldn't engage in them as much because I felt like I had to have an answer or wasn't able to just show up for the uncertainty and the exploration. So yeah, so much of my satisfaction right now comes from practicing, like showing up as me and allowing other people to do the same. Something else, I was so afraid to leave my job. And I realized part of the reason that I was staying is because I was so afraid to be judged. And in leaving, part of my process was reminding myself, like the people that I'm deeply connected to, like we're going to maintain that. That's not going to end at the door. And just the way that like people have already reached out, or like things that people said, like, hey, I really hope that we can stay connected. I feel like you're a kindred spirit. Yeah, really helped me to see how much of myself that I did bring to my workplace. And yeah, thinking of the Joseph Campbell, that like the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. Like I was so afraid to leave because I was afraid it was going to disconnect me, but it's actually connected me in an even more meaningful way. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
I love that because that requires risk, right? It's like, it's not going to be just easy. You're not going to, I think people sometimes think like, I'll just know. And you may know, and it's still challenging.
Oh my gosh. It took me, someone finally said to me, you sound like you're in a relationship that you know is over and you're not willing to leave. And I was like, you are so right. And it was someone that I had just met, kind of just like witnessing me in a group talking. And we talked afterwards, and it was just spot on. I just lost my train of thought. Oh, just the process of deciding to leave. It took me so long, so many conversations. And what I actually did that I don't think I would have done if it weren't for our work together, I took a week off because I, was burnt out, recognized I needed space, and thought that I would do a vacation, and was like, you know what? That takes time and money and energy. I'm just going to stay home. And ended up that I had made the decision to leave my job and was like, oh my gosh, now I'm going to have this open week to really ground myself and make sure that I'm clear and be able to go back to work and, announce that I'm leaving. And that's what I did. So yeah, it was a huge process in trusting myself and doing it also on my terms. Like I gave 4 months notice because I know myself, and I know that like I would really want to be part of the transition and really make sure that things could be set up as well as they could for my coworker who took over for me. So yeah, being clear on what I wanted and what I wanted to co-create in a way that I never had been before.
I love that. I love it. We can co-create all the time, but when we're stuck in that black and white thinking, it's really hard to see that. What about you, Linda?
Well, actually, like listening to Brienne talk, I started to think about like the past. So, just quick recap. I left a job that I love, and then I was someplace else for about 15 months. Went there because I was really inspired and ready for a challenge. But it was like, when I think about the past 15 months, they were grueling. And so it's funny because as I'm thinking of ease, I'm like, right now, nothing feels like it was easy, but I'm realizing that I know there's a difference between the ease and something being easy. But I think what I was able to do was quickly recognize that the fit wasn't right. Recognize that it was mainly leadership, my manager, who was just a really poor fit for me. And I think realizing like it wasn't one of those things like it's all me, realizing this isn't the right fit. It's not a match. And I feel like I came to that conclusion really quickly. And I didn't doubt myself. Like, I can't leave because I need to be here a year before I do anything else. Like I quickly realized what was up, realizing if, I'm not sure about the organization, but right now with this current, leader, I can't stay here. I can't work in this environment. It's not working for me. And I just feel like all of that part, I feel like would have been a really big struggle for me before, where I wasn't fighting myself. I trusted myself, my intuition. Again, like I said, even by like December, where I was like, I miss my friends, I knew still something else was up. It wasn't just that particular piece, but I got this great support system around me. I had a lot of fun. I laughed a lot. I don't think people knew how miserable I was because I was still enjoying myself, like still being myself, getting shit done. Like, I did some great things and I'm really proud of the work I did. But meanwhile, the cool part is like, I was having these other conversations, like with other potential jobs and networking in a way that I have never networked. Like, networking isn't natural for me, but I was like exploring my network and really trying to find the right next step for me. Like I knew I needed to leave, but I didn't want to just leave because I was jumping ship. I wanted to leave for something. And I was, I patiently waited, and I just feel like, it was easy to trust my intuition in a way that I think never would have been. And, like I said, meanwhile, handling a difficult situation and still getting things done and pushing through. So I think that's the ease. The ease came at a time of really grueling, like kind of surroundings and context. And, and I also think about creativity, just, thinking about part of what I had to do was roll out really unpopular kind of like new processes. So essentially part of what I did was cut everyone's budget at the entire university. Like, that was something I did. And the funniest part is everyone loved me for it. Like, it sounds really weird. Like, I don't know how it sounds, but like it came out at the end where people were like, yeah, like all the vice presidents and president was like, yeah, this is really what needed to happen. But it was like, I'm so proud of the way I did it. And some of it was creativity. Like, I had these great presentations that really broke down the need to do what I did, help people understand and educate them and have the conversations that needed to happen. So, like, I feel like I did something that would be really, really difficult to do if I was like battling myself. And it was more, the funny part was too, like the path forward, like the fact that I needed to cut millions of dollars off budgets was so clear. And I was like, all right, I just got to figure out now how to propose this. How am I going to sell this idea? How do I partner with everyone? And I did that work. And it was funny because there were a couple of times where it was just grueling because there was a lot of work to do. And those would be the times where I'm like, all right, got to get on the green smoothies, like make sure I'm eating well. Right around that time, Dr. Raquel was like, you seem really stressed. You need to start getting massages. I was like, all right, I'm on it. Got a few massages, like a couple, like weekly massages. And then I started working out and doing yoga again. Like, so at the most busy, crazy time, I started doing things that usually would be like, all right, it's time to start working out because I want to lose weight. In my mind, I was doing these things because I wanted to nurture myself. And I actually think it was around January where I did a boot camp. Like, it was a 3 times a week, very rigorous boot camp. And I did that through August because it felt like something I needed to kind of, keep my energy up. And I was doing it not for weight, but for energy. And it felt right. And then around August, something happened where I was like, I can't do this right now. And I recognized that. And it was also right around when I was interviewing for this new job. And I think that also kind of created that space to, find the next step.
Well, you said so many important things that I think people to realize, like, that is what resilience is when, first of all, I think it's amazing too. Not only would you probably have started, I don't even know, at least the old me would have, during that stressful time, just started eating, not gone to a boot camp for weight loss. I would have just been like, too much, like, there will be an easier time. But what you're describing, to be creative, we have to be able to hold multiple feelings, right? It's resilience is increasing our capacity for life is good here and it's stressful here, or this is good and this is bad. And again, that's part of that when we haven't retrained our nervous system, when our story is controlling us, we only almost have like the fantasy or bad, right? It's like all or nothing. And so being able to expand that capacity, you were able to really work magic in something that, like the way that you broke that down, and everything is about the how. My sister and I always talk about this with entrepreneurship. Everybody has big ideas, but it's how you execute it. And if you even execute it, but how you do it. And that's our creative mark, right? Like, and you can be really proud of that. Even though you didn't love the job, you were still able to be creative and bring your soul there, right? Because our soul is how we're different. Spirit's how we're all one. Soul is how, like, this is how I'm doing this. And it lives in the body and the intuition.
And things that I've heard are, I don't think anyone else, I mean, you know, maybe someone else, but I don't think what I did could have happened without me there, you know? So it is something I feel really good about. I like that. I brought my soul to it.
You did. You know, and I think another thing that popped up in my mind is you were saying about cutting people's budgets, and it reminds me that creativity thrives on constraints, right? If you tell someone like, hey, I want you to paint a picture, or I mean, I'm using, again, a stereotypical version of creativity, but you need constraints so that you can actually create something. And I think that's part of why diets, again, if we think of like, this is us trying to channel this energy, diets give us constraints, right? It's like, here's the plan, here's how you work out, here's what you count. And then we're always trying to figure out how to circumvent that, right? Like when I used to do Weight Watchers, I was like, well, maybe that was only 2 points in the morning. I think I can carry it out. Totally. Structure, right? I think I've been talking about this actually a lot in the Insatiable, what we're referring to as the Insatiable community. It's beta launching. So stay tuned to the podcast for the spring. But we talked about this on that Q&A call, that like we do need some structure, right? Like no one can just free flow. I mean, some people can, and we all need different degrees, but creativity and like these constraints really give us the structure that we need. And if we don't have it in some sort of creative tension, which brings me to my next point, I think that's part of why we like plans and things, because it's giving us the structure that we need for creativity. Which brings me to the last point, which is I've really observed that all of my clients, when they come to Truths with Food or work with me privately, yeah, they're exhausted by the food and body battle, but there's also this whispers of a life shift. And what I really realized is that my clients are all leaders. And what I mean is the work we do together is so far out in Truths with Food, right? Like everyone's like, I don't even know how to describe this. But what I've come to realize is that the people who embark on a Truths with Food, which really is a truce with life, and it's looking at life in a more nuanced, neutral way so that we're not just reacting, is I realize that all of you guys are standing in what Parker Palmer calls the tragic gap. And Parker Palmer was someone who I studied in grad school. He's amazing. I highly recommend checking him out. But he talks about the tragic gap is holding the tension between the hardness, the darkness that is, and that is reality, and what we know is possible. And we know it's possible, as he says, because I'm quoting him here, everybody. These are not my words. As he says that the tragic gap is holding the tension between the hardness, the darkness that is, and what we know is possible. Because we've seen it with our own eyes. We know what forgiveness and kindness looks like. I added, we know what beauty looks like, right? We know what freedom looks like because we've felt it at times. And we know what is and what could and should be. And he talks about we don't want to flip out on one side or the other. So to stand out on one side where you are in that darkness is a corrosive reality and saying this is just the way things are. Or to flip out on the other side, he said, which is an equally dangerous trap, to fall into irrelevant idealism. And he said they sound like they are 180 degrees apart, but they actually take us to the same place, out of the action. They disengage us from standing in the gap where we can move things forward, practicing the powers that open the heart, that open the mind, and that open the soul into being. It's a remarkable combination of inner work, which is the examine life, and when we do it in community. And so I realized that for most of my clients, they have work to do in the world, and work can be in their work, how they parent, how they are a daughter, how they are a friend. It doesn't matter, but they are in that tragic gap of trying to push us to a more equal, fair, just society. So I'm curious where each of you now feel that where you're standing in the tragic gap with all this self-trust, resilience, and courage, not to know that it's going to be easy, but that you can stand there and move things forward. What is your creative edge?
We're going with the usual order.
Yeah.
Yeah, this feels really vulnerable to say, knowing it's going to be on a podcast. I'm going to stumble my way through it. But where I am standing in the tragic gap now is how I'm relating to my whiteness. So I talked earlier about holding out for the people you belong to, or maybe the people who share your vision, and that being really hard. And I, as a public health nurse, worked with families of color living in poverty for years and, was really focused on racism. And then the past 2 years, feel really lucky to have been introduced to people's ideas about, white supremacy. And I just, when it came to the attacking other white people and attacking people whose conditioned mindsets, were dangerous or whose values were really misaligned with mine, I felt like, how do I do this? How do I work on my own whiteness while showing up with other people for these conversations without feeling like I'm not showing up as me? And I found a teacher, her name is Laura Brewer, and this course I started, it was so honestly mind-blowing the way things worked out. I finished work on November 2nd, and so many things I conspired, like I said, lots of thinking and planning, and for my last day to be November 2nd. And I found that this course, Whites Confronting Racism, was starting November 5th. So finished on a Friday. This was starting on a Monday. And I knew racial justice work was part of what I wanted this open space to be about. I wanted to be really intentional about spending time and emotional energy working on my conditioning and my stuff that was not supporting me to show up in the ways I wanted to and be more verbal in the ways I want to. So in this course, we are looking at, again, the way we're relating to our own whiteness. So we're not focusing on other people's racism and really looking in the mirror. So what I'm loving about it is not just about changing the way of thinking. It's changing your way of being in the world. So in what ways does dominant white conditioning live in me? And how can I see that and make more conscious choice? And I just feel so many of the tools from Truths with Food, it was incredible to me how, my work and then my work with you led me to this space where, a big part of our work is seeing when we're in binary thinking, seeing when we're in perfectionism, avoiding vulnerability, trying to remain in comfort. Yeah, so I'm just feeling really amazed by, thinking again what you said about nature organizing at higher levels of complexity, how I feel the skills I was building and what I was exposed to in different areas of my life were leading me to this course, which I laughed because I was so excited when I applied and was accepted. And I was oh, I'm so excited now, but I'm going to be so deep in my stuff and uncomfortable. And last night, we had a call and I got off and I was super uncomfortable and I ordered takeout. And I was I'm totally ordering takeout to reestablish my comfort right now. And I can see that I'm doing it and I'm still making the choice. But yeah, Allie and I talked about putting a link to the course in the show notes. I know the next cohort opens in January and applications are up now through mid-December. So for other folks who have done some anti-racism work, some looking at their whiteness and want to take the next step, check it out.
I love that you shared that because, again, if we think that ordering the takeout is going to ruin our chance at whatever goals we think we have, right? We then start focusing on the diet instead of looking at our own whiteness is really challenging, right? It's I've been doing it in a different way, not as intensely as you. And it's just it leaves you feeling horrible about the world. And I know it's not about our feelings at all. However, it's a lot to look at, right? And you're taking, though, I think what's important is every level that we call intrusive food, we call it going around the spiral staircase because every time you go around, you're taking bigger risks, right? And everything's been preparing you for this. And, you mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier, and, everyone takes his quote, "Follow your bliss," and brings their own context to it. But it's been completely taken out of context. Your bliss is not necessarily that you're going to be happy all the time. Yet, when you experience those things like the synchronicity and all the things conspiring together, like how amazing does that feel? Like that kind of feeds you, like, metaphor appropriate, right?
It absolutely does. And Allie, like this is something that I just so appreciate. And I've said to you before, like sometimes it makes me laugh because I feel so connected to you because I'm listening to the podcast and, but you're not always aware, right? Of like the times when I'm like, I've been asking myself the same question or like, having a similar insight. And I remember something that you brought up was this quote from The Alchemist, that when we truly want something, the universe is always conspiring with us. And like, is that true for everybody? And, I share a similar line of thinking in that, like, if it's not true for like people of color living in poverty and it's true for me, then like, that's just about white privilege, right? So like this for me, I think another piece of it is that it's not just one thing, right? Like it fed me on a deep level, seeing the way that this unfolded time-wise. And also I'm like, yeah, part of it is white privilege because I'm even, like exposed to this course and I'm paid for this course and all of it. But there's something like so much greater that this timing worked out and like found this teacher who's like connecting to this work in a way that like is deeply embodied and I feel so connected to. And like, her teachers are teachers of color and like she acknowledges like everything that we're talking about and like doing in this course, like this has all been done and said by people of color. And like, that's who I learn from, and our work, like something that you said is it's not about our feelings, but it is in that like, until we can be with ourselves and our own feelings, like we can't truly show up and hold space, for the discomfort and the challenging conversations.
I'm glad you said that because I was reading a James Baldwin quote and he said, why do white people need and he used the N-word, right? And I was like, oh my God, white culture is not emotionally, it doesn't have the emotional, and again, I'm talking about whiteness as an identity, everyone. This is getting like, really complex conversations, but when you look at, and we've talked about this in Truths with Food, the healthier you get, the more violent you see our culture is, not just with guns and mass shootings, but you go to the doctor and they like dismiss, you're in pain. It's like, you don't get heard. There's all these ways. You're right. We have to learn to be with our feelings. I'm glad you corrected me on that.
Yeah. And I mean, it's, I'm learning too. And like, because white domination is about separation, right? Like if we're connected to our own humanity, we cannot watch our society, watch our culture, watch the people around us dehumanize others. So like we have to connect to our own humanity before we're truly able to like take a stand for the humanity of another, which is again, back to why the like shaming and blaming and attacking. I'm like, oh, like, I get it that like people want to discharge that anger, but like, I think about like what's actually going to work. And for me, it's like the heart,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. That's a very big tragic gap. And I know that you can rise to the occasion.
Thank you. When I'm having my doubts, I'll be like, Allie, remind me I can do
that. But that's where we find self-trust, right? Like I'm thinking about with Linda, like, all right, this is not the right fit. And I don't want to just jump at anything, because that's one thing we do when we're battling food, our body, which is a battle with life, is that protective side of us that's feeling really uncomfortable just reacts, right? And goes to the other extreme. And so takes a lot of work and self-awareness. And so Linda, over to you. What is your tragic gap? And I think it's important for people to realize everyone's tragic gap is so different, right?
I'm like, Leanne. Now I call you Leanne. Like,
are you trying to call me Leanie?
So excited for you, and I really enjoyed hearing about it. And it's true. Like, so on the one hand, I'm like, mine's so. I was just going to say more about me, but I feel like that's what yours is too, is coming to terms and understanding that. So yeah, I agree. They're all different, and I think right now I'm standing on the kind of like, I want to say a cliff, but not really. But like I'm standing on like a new dawn, this job is new. And, I took a week off between the two, and I spent some time thinking like, well, like, who do I, I think a question that came to my mind was, who do I want to be in this role? Like not like, who do I want to be? Not myself, but like, who am I? Because the past year has been really, really difficult. And I'm like, who am I as a leader? And I think what I'm really starting to realize is now I'm not working for someone that I'm going to be micromanaged by. I'm going to be able to like really, be authentic and be, I'm thinking about, Brianne, when you decided what kind of leader you wanted to be, where, I was leading, a team, but now I'm, going to be working towards leading an organization. And I'm really excited to see, who I am when I'm doing that. And I'm not I don't have anything figured out yet. And it's going to kind of expose itself organically as I go through the process. And I think part of what I'm learning right now is being comfortable with that uncertainty and not knowing what direction it's going to take. I have my initial, year, I'd say few months to year is going to be rolling out this kind of big project that's probably slightly unpopular, just like my other thing, but it's like kind of learning how I'm going to do that and how other people are going to respond to it and how I partner with everyone. So I think right now it's really just getting kind of the landscape and then letting things develop as they will. But I think keeping that authentic me in there so that I'm quicker to find my people. It's kind of funny. Like, I already feel like I found a couple of my people, you know what I mean? Like, there's just a few people that I already am like, I can't wait to have lunch with this person, which in the past I'd be like at lunch, I'm like, I got to decompress. Like, I can't do, but I'm realizing like, that's an important thing for me, is to have a support system set up. So I don't know. I feel like, the future's bright. I'm very excited about it. It's a matter of kind of letting things unfold, because there's going to be layers. One other funny thing that I realized is that I hadn't been cooking a lot. I was thinking about the takeout. We had been ordering more takeout than I've ever ordered in my life for the past 15 months. Like, I just didn't have the energy to like even do the cooking. Like, Mike was doing most of the cooking for me, and I'm so thankful that he did that. But last week, it was just almost like when the shackles of that old job were gone, I was like, I feel like I can actually cook again. And I like ordered, some stuff. I planned a menu, like nothing, really crazy. And like, I've cooked like the last 3 nights, and I'm like, it feels so good. Cause that was like a hobby of mine. Like, I actually really enjoy cooking, like enjoy that thing. That just been like a hobby that I haven't done. So I don't know. I just feel like kind of having some of that other anxiety off my plate is really just freeing me a little to do some other things.
Yeah. Well, and you were saying this is about me, but all leadership is self-leadership, right? Like, if we can't manage ourselves, and especially you leading an organization, that trickles down, and especially the level that you're at, and you control all the purse strings. I mean, that's like all the levers. And so and I love hearing you say, I'm going to let it fold organically, because when we don't have self-trust, resilience, and courage, we overplan and we miss out on what's actually arising. And again, we're taught the body's a mechanical model, that life is a mechanical, we work from 9 to 5, like everything is this superimposed, there's structure, when really it's fluid structure. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I'm forgetting the woman's name, but she was talking even about like an anatomy, when we say the spinal column, she's like, it's not actually a column. She's like, it's discs and it's fluid. And I was like, oh my God, even the way we talk about anatomy has this mechanical lens on thing. And if you really want to make a mark on the world, you have to tap into your intuition and what's arising and what's true. And it gets fun after a while, right? You like taking on the risks. And I was thinking about how you were saying, even with takeout, like, it's like, okay, whatever, I'm taking this risk right now, and I'm doing the best that I can, and measuring not what would be perfect, but am I doing better than last time I was completely stressed and overwhelmed, right? And that enables us to, like, I always, for listeners, measure what you would have done last time, not perfection. That's how you're growing.
Like in the past, like, takeout for me would be a reason to go off, like whatever diet or plan. This was more like, we got to get, we're lucky, so we're in Philly, we have caviar delivery, so we're getting healthy food. Like, it feels so ridiculous, like we're paying a lot of money and we're getting healthy food, but it's like takeout, so it still is, but it's so different than it would have been. You're right.
I'm so glad you clarified that too, because I'm thinking like in my mind, I'm like sag paneer, like, you know.
There was like pho and like shish kebabs.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's a great example of like when you're out of that all or nothing and you trust yourself and you know, like, okay, I'm not going to let this body battle or food battle derail me. It's like, I'm doing the best I can and this will take care of, you know, when we were emailing, you're like, I know it'll take care of itself when this job transition happens. And that's self-trust. And I think that's so important that dieting really robs from us. And I would even say in many ways, conventional medicine does too. But yeah, so, all right, we have gone on quite a bit, but I hope it was valuable for people to really understand what it takes to get out of this food and body battle. It does start with knowing what foods work for you, which is so important because, right, how can we don't even know how to feed ourselves. It's like, how can we get to have the energy to take on this other stuff? Now, for those of you listening, I want you to think about, if you're thinking, okay, what is my safe self-expression? What am I afraid? Because I think, you know, I think another thing that gets lost is I think we act like women are so insecure. And like, haven't you always felt certain confident in certain areas, but then it's other areas that you feel held back in? Like, I have this theory that we're not like these damsels in distress telling us we are. So if you're thinking, listeners, I want to give you guys 2 questions to start to think, what do I need to feel more confident in the areas that I'm not? Here's some ways to think of goals rather than an end goal like weight loss or even eating clean. What I want you to first do is think of a habit that you would have to start to achieve your bigger health goals. So instead of pounds lost, think of what will it take to get there? Like, don't use food to reward myself or becoming more active. And you want to think of more of a habit, a lifestyle habit that you would have to do. And then I want you to ask yourself, who do I have to become to accomplish that goal? Who do I have to become to accomplish that goal? And it's going to surprise you. As Brianne and Linda have showed, all of the ways that following their truths, their radical truths, going into the layers, the deeper we root, the higher we can rise and come home to ourselves. I want you to think about that for your 2019 goals and frame them that way. Do you guys have any parting words for people who want to meet up on the path for safe self-expression and making their mark in only the way that each of us can do?
I think just like all the love. This is hard work. It's like exhausting to try to figure out who we are and what we need. And I think a lot of times we can look at other people and think they have it all figured out and get on ourselves about all the ways we don't. But yeah, just try to be kind with yourself. Like, what are you doing right? Where are you strong? And start from there.
Good.
Not right. I don't want to say, what are you doing right? What are you doing that is feeding you on a deep level?
Great questions. Linda?
And I also, and actually to build on that and something that you said, Allie, is that things aren't black and white. So like where you said, you know, we're damsels in distress or whatever, like, what are you doing well? Or what are you, you know, whatever the right, you know, way to think about that is for you, you know. And also like even taking that different twist on my takeout thing where I'm like, I don't feel good about doing takeout as much as I am, but I'm like, but on the other hand, I'm doing it okay. Like I'm doing it the best way I can. And I know like even through the problems I was having with my manager, I'm like, it still was never a black or white thing where I'm like, I can't take her. Like I would see redeeming qualities or I'd find things that I need that I could learn from her. So it was like, you know, finding that gray area and also being comfortable with it. It's easier to make things black and white, but I feel like the gray area is where you kind of start discovering things.
That's where creativity is, right?
It's so much richer to live there. It's harder. It's hard as F, but
and it's totally worth it, right? I mean, I think it's worth it. I don't want to
absolutely.
Yeah, and if you guys want a framework that's been is research based and proven, remember that's what Truth with Food is. It's to help you understand yourself, physical, emotional, so you can align with your soul and hear it. We are starting in January. Well, registration's in January, but it starts in February. And this is where you can be a couple years out because, yeah, it's been so long, but it's just, I love hearing how much further you guys and deeper your lives have become. So thank you so much. And Brianne and Linda, you both are in different directions, but such new adventures. And hopefully you can come back in a couple years or even sooner and let us know where you are then. So thank you for being here.
Sure.
Thank
Happy
you.
to. A lot of fun.
Keep you updated.
I miss our group calls.
I know, me too.
They're so fun. Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.